Welcome to my channel. Thank you for checking in. I'm sorry that we haven't had a stream for it's about 2 weeks now because we had technical difficulties 2 weeks ago, and then last week I was busy. But now we are finally getting back into our book club, and today we are discussing Joseph de Maistre, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, The Generative Principle of Political Constitutions. Now this is a text I've been wanting to read for a while, especially Joe de Maistre, given his reputation as a traditional Catholic, kind of ultra-conservative, kind of father of reactionary conservatism, sort of along the lines of Edmund Burke, but a little bit more, even further, I would say. Whereas you say Burke was sort of the father of conservatism. Well, this is like the father of ultra-conservatism, Joe de Maistre. And he has a lot of threads in this work. It actually kind of reminds me a lot of another book we read, Patriarcha, which is not really a book, but an essay, and a lot of similar themes. So to give a summary of what exactly the text is about, I think it's actually best if we just look at these 4 points that were brought up by the text itself. And I think these summarize very well. So his 4 points are that the fundamental principles of political constitutions exist before all written law. 2. That a constitutional law is and can only be the development or sanction of an unwritten pre-existing right. 3. That which is most essential, most intrinsically constitutional, and truly fundamental is never written, and could not be, without endangering the state. That the weakness and fragility of a constitution are actually in direct proportion to the multiplicity of written constitutional articles. So a pretty interesting 4-point thesis right here, and we'll talk about what exactly that means. So this is basically a criticism of a written constitution. So if you look at this first point, that fundamental principles exist before all written law. Just because you write something, that doesn't make it evidently true, and that the act of writing is not the arbiter of truth, the arbiter of human rights, the arbiter of what this government aims to be, right? So these principles actually exist before the written word. And the word actually, it weakens the power of this intrinsic truth. So the constitutional law is and can only be the development or sanction of an unwritten pre-existing right. So exactly this. The Constitution can only manifest in words something that already exists transcendentally and spiritually. And so third, that which is most essential, most intrinsically constitutional, and truly fundamental is never written and could not be without endangering the state. So this is a little bit more esoteric, but it makes sense if you think about it. If you look at even something like the American Constitution and what is written in there, there's certain things that are totally withheld because to write them down would be counterproductive to what the actual aim is. So you have a constitution that inherently assumes things like the value of human life, or that there is something to human rationality, or they say that murder is illegal, but they don't say murder is wrong. They don't say why it's wrong, right? And if you actually were to articulate certain arguments about these things, it would in fact weaken the Constitution itself, which goes to point number 4, that the weakness and fragility of a constitution are actually in direct proportion to the multiplicity of written constitutional articles. So actually, the more you write, the weaker your constitution is, which if you think about it, it makes a whole lot of sense, because when you put something into writing, it is becoming very concrete, and it is much easier to argue with words than it is to argue with an idea, right? And we have an idea of this in the modern day with the Second Amendment, right? I mean, obviously we understand what was going through the heads of the Founding Fathers, right? They had no intention to limit the purchase and sale of weapons, but because they put it explicitly into words, and the words have the ability to be attacked in the way that an idea can't be, right? You can argue semantics and things like that. The other half of this is that as soon as you put something into words, there's an implication that the words are the reasoning behind why this fact is true, right? So if you were to write into your Constitution, life has value, well, that essentially is making the government and the Constitution the ultimate judge of whether life has value, to the point where if the government just repeals that statement, does life no longer have value? Well, it would supposedly be yes, which is why certain things absolutely cannot be put into writing, because they both cheapen the Constitution but also cheapen the truth behind it. So if you are going to imply that the words are what is leading to truth and not that the truth existed before the words, then as soon as you erase the words, you are changing the truth. And the truth has to be immutable. It cannot be decided by words on a page. So I think this is a good summary of the basic ideas behind what he calls this generative principle, right? So the generative principle, to summarize in one sentence, is the fact that putting a constitution into words isn't what makes it a constitution. It is the inherent truth that and the rights that exist before the writing. So that would be the words are generated from the truth as opposed to the opposite. So just a few comments I'm going to go through. We have Jerome here. Hi, Jerome. The more bureaucratic, the worse. Go figure. Well, yeah, of course, we all know that. People over pages. If we have good people as guides, we won't need to rely on pages upon pages of rules, regulations, and nonsense. Very true. And this is something that Godfrey brought up, actually. I wanted to give him credit for this, but he pointed out how applicable this is to Protestantism and the reading of the Bible. So you have words in the Bible, and you have a similar task, a similar occurrence as with the Constitution, that as soon as you put these spiritual truths into the writing of the Bible, it makes them open to lines of attack, right? Whereas obviously there is a spirit behind the Bible that is totally immutable, infallible, and there's a truth there, right? Whereas the actual words are one step removed from the truth, and therefore the words can be attacked, distorted, and warped to just about any type of worldview, right? And which is exactly what you see today, is people will take a single Bible verse out of context and use it to justify just about any position, which is why you kind of need people as the arbiters of truth and not words, because wisdom, and a wisdom that has been deliberated and decided upon, right? He also says that is coming from God, right? And ultimately, and this is another thing I didn't really get into yet, where are these immutable truths coming from? Where is this generative principle starting? It is all starting from a higher power that is God. And anything that is going to be written down, right, is one step removed from that truth that is truly divine. And so once again, if you look at the Bible, right, the Bible we say is divinely inspired, but it is still one step removed from the actual divine truth. It is just the writing of the truth. And that's where we see it distorted. That's where we see, rampant Protestantism and modern day Christians who really are only Christians in this very superficial way and not truly understanding the letter of the law, right? They say the letter of the law and the spirit of the law are two different things. Sorry. So I messed that up. They're not understanding the spirit of the law. They're following the letter of the law. They're not getting at this spirit because they're too focused just on interpretation of the words. Whereas if you have this Catholic Church, right, that is this real arbiter of what the words mean and the truth behind them, that is more attached to the truth than just the words are. So very, very interesting, and I have to say it's kind of hard to argue against. I mean, if you believe in any kind of immaterial absolute truths, you'd say that there has to be some kind of truth beyond words, and that words are actually a step removed from that and truly a distortion of what is known to be true just by virtue of being a rational man. All right, so moving on from there, just a few sections that I want to talk about. So there's one section where he actually praised missionaries, which I just thought was interesting, because he compared it to philosophers such as Rousseau, who said that the missionaries were just as bad as the conquerors, and he says that this is sort of a true falling towards moral relativism, whereas these missionaries were 100 times greater than the conquerors because they were not acting so selfishly, right? They went into dangerous areas to try and actually bring what they perceived as the truth to these supposedly savage peoples, which is a very noble task. And he even writes this it's like an ode that he says he would like to see inscribed on a pedestal. It says, "To the Christian Osiris, whose envoys have traversed the earth to pluck men from misery, from brutishness and ferocity, by teaching them agriculture, by giving them laws, by teaching them the knowledge and service of God, thus taming the hapless savage, not by force of arms, of which they never had need, but by mild persuasion and moral songs and the power of hymns, insomuch as they were thought to be angels." Now this is interesting because this goes side by side with his other point that you can only have a civilized society that is close to God, that is a religious society, which for the most part you can see is quite true for the most part. And even besides Christian societies, all of the greatest empires, and he goes through this, they were all very, very highly religious. So he looks at the most famous nations of antiquity, especially the most serious and wise, such as the Egyptians, Etruscans, Lacedaemonians. For those of you who don't know, Lacedaemonians are the Spartans, and Romans, had precisely the most religious constitutions, and the duration of empires has always been proportioned to the degree of influence which the religious principle had acquired in the political constitution. The cities and nations most addicted to divine worship have always been the most durable, the most wise, as the most religious ages have also been the most distinguished for genius. Never have nations been civilized except by religion. No other known instrument has power over savage man. So really, really powerful stuff here. And I think anybody would be hard-pressed to really argue with this, and they might have some kind of rationalizations as to why this is true besides just this unification factor of religion. But you do need this power of religion to have a strong, cohesive society, right? And I think that, tribalistic and racial aspects are one thing, but that's only one factor. I think that a shared religion is another factor that is extremely important, and that's what's going to take. It's going to take the society beyond the material, right? So you're not just working for your own survival, right? As a purely Darwinian organism, you're working for your perceived truth, which is a very, very powerful, very, very powerful driving factor, right? Because survival, you can sort of rationalize away survival in certain ways, as you see the kind of nihilistic types do, but you absolutely cannot rationalize away divine truth. And I like this language he uses: cities and nations most addicted to divine worship. So they're quite literally they can't withhold themselves from practicing this divine worship, and that is what's going to force them into being successful. And you also see this kind of divine institutions and academic institutions went hand in hand back in ancient empires as well as into the Middle Ages. Your scholars and your scientists were all very religious people. It's only in the modern day that we see this divorce from religion and science, which de Maistre actually talks about. He says, "This principle being incontestable, what shall we think of a generation which has cast all to the winds, even to the foundations of the social edifice, by rendering education purely scientific? It was impossible to be deceived in a manner more dreadful, for every system of education that does not rest upon religion as its basis will fall in a trice, or will only diffuse poison through the state, religion being, as Bacon has well said, the aromatic which prevents science from becoming corrupt." And once again, this is something that anybody's going to be very hard-pressed to argue against. And you can see that the second you have this Enlightenment era kind of the origins of scientism, and especially the rise of atheism, science has become totally misguided. Right? We had this this idea where science, well, nowadays you have this idea that science and religion are totally antithetical, that you cannot be a rational scientific person while also being a religious person, whereas this is totally contradictory to how it existed for 2,000 years before this. You had people that were philosophers and scientists. They were doing what they did because they were religious people, because they believed in something beyond the material, beyond the mere faculties of man alone, because they wanted to find a way of expressing the greatness of man as well as understanding divine creation. Right? They wanted to take this world and do our best to advance it. Right? And what advance exactly means, that's more up for debate. But religion and science have only recently been divorced. And like he says, as soon as you have this separation, science is totally corrupt, right? Because what is science now? We're not really doing things that are all that beneficial to us anymore. Do you think if science were still run by religious people, would we be having arguments over whether we should modify fetuses in the womb? Would we be having arguments over whether we should whether we should upload our consciousness to a computer, right? Would that ever be a conversation that would be coming up? Absolutely not, because they would understand intrinsically that these things are false and corrupt pursuits of science that are not worthy for us to even be discussed, and it's just a waste of our resources that is not bringing us any closer to the divine, is not bringing us any closer to a true understanding of ourselves or the world. So, very interesting there, and very prescient. This was, written 1800s, and you can see that he was kind of sounding the alarm much before these things truly got bad. So then he talks a little bit about the 18th century, so his century, and as we all know, this was kind of where things started to go bad, right, with the French Revolution and the origins of the Enlightenment and such. And he has this really great speech. He says, "Then that character of impiety, which belongs only to the 18th century, manifests itself for the first time. It is no longer the cold tone of indifference, or at most the malignant irony of skepticism. It is a mortal hatred. It is the tone of anger, and often of rage. The writers of that period, at least the most distinguished of them, no longer treat Christianity as an immaterial human error. They pursue it as a capital enemy. They oppose it to the last extreme. It is a war to the death, and that would seem incredible if we had not sad proofs of it before our eyes. Is that many of those men who call themselves philosophers advance from the hatred of Christianity to personal hatred of its divine author. They hated him, capital H, as really as one hates a living enemy. two men especially who will forever be covered with anathemas of posterity distinguish themselves by the form of flagitiousness, which should appear to be above the power of the most depraved human nature. And there's a note that talks about who he's referring to, but not very, it's D'Alembert and Voltaire, but that's just kind of implied. But more importantly, we see that, if you were a religion skepticist, or a skeptic, it would at least be a sort of intelligent kind of subdued argument. I don't really believe in that kind of thing. I don't really see how you could prove the existence of God, which is, it causes it's grounds for a rational debate. You can have a intelligent conversation surrounding that and hopefully reach a peaceful disagreement. Whereas this was sort of the origins of militant atheism. Rather than just saying God doesn't exist, you say God doesn't exist and I hate him, and I want all mention of God to be purged from society. And I want every shred of Christianity to be removed from society, which is what we're not starting to see. We're seeing the end of this nowadays. Right, we are trying to totally secularize everything. We have people up in arms that, the Constitution even mentions God. And this sort of winds it all the way back to the beginning, is now you have people that are against God, against the divine truth. Yet the divine truth is the one thing that is holding a political constitution together. Right, you are not given rights by a constitution, because if a constitution is giving you rights, it can just as easily take them away. No, your rights are God-given. Everything that is fundamental, everything that we hold to be true, has to be a product of a divine truth. Which, if you don't believe that, that could be a very long debate. But I would think that most of us do understand that. And if you are going to reject that divine truth, then, all of a sudden, all you have is a piece of paper, right? If you look at, the product of the French Revolution, you had this new government that was just totally empty, devoid of anything such as a divine mandate, any kind of appeal to a higher power, and therefore it collapsed. It was totally crushed. It was not useful, and once again, you could see the Maestra is obviously a proponent of monarchy, right? Because a monarch is the true, it's the most natural system of government. It is the most, how would I say, it's historically proven to be effective. And once again, you have a single monarch who is ruling by divine right, mandate of heaven, as you might call it. And in this sense, the monarchy, it's transcendent, right? It is not going to be rooted in any kind of material institution, which is what we're seeing now, right? You have a piece of paper that you are worshiping beyond anything else. And especially you see this in America, you have constitutional conservatives. Well, you're worshiping a piece of paper when you should be worshiping what was behind that piece of paper, which was supposed to be a divine truth, given to us by God. And this is very interesting words you see in the preamble of the Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Now, where is self-evident? Where does this phrase coming from? What makes something self-evident? Well, I would say that it is self-evident because it is the truth. It is the divine truth that you understand intrinsically due to your relationship with the divine. And it's funny because people worship the Constitution, whereas if I today were in a debate and said, well, I just hold this truth to be self-evident, I would get nothing but taxing. Well, you can't say that that's true because this is relative and blah, 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 and nihilism and all of this. Whereas our founding fathers very much understood that truths were self-evident. Now, once again, I think that, the Constitution itself has plenty of flaws in it. But just interesting wording like that is reflective of the fact that there is this higher truth, this divine truth, and it is something that we have very much strayed away from. So with that, I think I mostly got into what I wanted to talk about with this work. I hope you guys enjoyed. If anybody has any questions or comments that they would like to bring up, I will hit the voice lines. Let's see, where is general? All right. So I'll hang around for a little bit, and if nobody wants to talk, then I will call it right here. Also, feel free to post text questions or anything in the chat. If you can't talk right now, I will be sure to respond to that. And once again, if you're watching a replay of this, remember, like, subscribe, follow me on all of my links, Telegram, Odysee. I've seen some smaller channels getting some heat on YouTube, so I wonder how long I'm going to last on here. So make sure you're following the backup on Odysee. So Funky Clock says, as it is the religious principle which has created everything, so it is the absence of the same principle which has destroyed everything. Yes, very true. And there was a quote, and I think it was another one that Godfrey posted. It said, it takes merely one man to destroy society, but to rebuild society takes engineers, architects, leaders, priests, and all of these various individuals. So as soon as you stray away from this divine principle, this generative principle, then you are basically just a castle built on sand. There's nothing holding this together. And once again, we kind of see this is sort of late stage liberalism, especially in America at least. You have a constitution that is being warped, right? It doesn't really mean anything, because you can just take these words and interpret them in whatever twisted way you'd like to the point where our government really has nothing at this point that is unmalleable, right? So we claim that we're resting on certain foundations, certain principles, but in practice, that is totally not true. There is nothing there that cannot be changed. There is nothing there that is immutable, infallible, and especially there is nothing divine, right? As soon as we move away from this divine, there is nothing. And this is one of the major flaws of liberalism that I have always brought up is, I guess, liberalism has nothing to stand on. It really just says everything is permitted, and everything has to be based on, this modicum of human freedom, whereas this is meaningless, right? Humanity, what makes you free? It doesn't. There is not really an answer to this question that is really non-contradictory with something else. You can't use freedom as your basis of something. You need to use some type of, once again, self-evident or divine truth. All right, I see Cass is in chat. Cass, are you wanting to talk?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. All right. So, wait, I just have to say really quick. I think I have it hooked up to the point where people can hear you through my computer on the stream. At least I hope so. And stream, I want you guys to immediately tell me if you can't hear Cass talking, so I could try and fix that. But okay, Cass, I want you to go talk now. So if you don't hear Cass, let me know you don't hear him.
So, can monarchy be revived? Can we have a monarchy, in this day and age?
Well,
Or
I would say Oh, actually, this is something I totally did not even go into. But he did talk about names, and there's a power of names, and the fact that you can't give something a name. A name has to be intrinsic. So what does that mean? And if you, he used the two examples he brought were constable and chancellor. So the word constable just means like the manager of a stable, right? Whereas the constable has now become like a law, a law keeper, right? Like a police officer type, right? And so this was just something that arose based on the nature of the position of constable and how it evolved. I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, but I think you guys understand. So to say this, you can't just call yourself something and you become that. And you think about another thing too is names they do change, and I think the changing of a name does lead to a certain changing of the substance, right? And I think a lot of us, we understand this because we are all using pseudonyms, right? I chose the name Ozymandias, right? And what exactly does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean anything until my actions give it meaning, in the same way that Cassius doesn't mean anything, right? That name is meaningless until I have an image of what it means to be Cassius. So in the same way, and I know I didn't really let you finish, but you made me remember this one point that I totally forgot to go into. But in the same way, you have a monarch, right? A person can't just call themselves king and develop. That doesn't give them the right of king, right? That doesn't give them the power over other men. It is their actions that are going to decide whether they are worthy of that title, right? So if you become a king, if you claim you are a king or a monarch, it is still the people who are going to ultimately decide whether you are divinely worthy of that name or not, right? So this is still we claim that, nowadays, whether or not kings could or could not have a divine right. Well, I think the divine right would arise through their actions and through their ability to act as a ruler. So that was a kind of a long-winded answer, but I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking, was more can a real king arise kind of in today's world, without some kind of scenario where you have like a blind, like we see. So, but for in what
So, and I will say, to the things of, you have certain dictators, in Africa or whatever, or the monarchs in Europe, right? These are not true monarchs. If anything, they're warlords, or at least the African version. And then the real the monarchy in England, that's just totally symbolic, does not mean anything. So could monarchs arise? Let's just use in America as example. Well, it would have to be the result of some drastic upheaval. If there was like a true, I don't think that we're going to elect some president and everybody's going to like him so much that he stays in office for the rest of his life. And that. So
some people were saying that with Trump, but of course it wasn't.
Right,
Most people.
And yeah, some people were saying that, and I think that that's just it's just not going to happen in the given system. You know, if there, I would say if you're trying to understand a monarch, and what creates a monarch, you would have to look at if there was, like you said, this blank slate scenario. So I say everything does in fact collapse. Greatness is going to arise. And it might take a century, it might take a millennia, but within that time, there will be a man who rises to the occasion, declares themselves king, and lives up to that title, and is deserving of the title. So, to say, could we have a modern monarchy? Well, not without drastic upheaval, because once again, we have a system that is not based on anything solid. It is not based on any kind of divine principle. So in order to restore a monarchy, you first have to restore that principle, which is going to require, like I said, the drastic upheaval. So I don't know, do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I agree, especially in the U.S., where we have no history, or in fact a history of revolting against monarchy. But I think that's long gone, and how hard the God Emperor Trump memes were going, I think that really shows how, I don't know, kind of innate this a monarchy is. It's just a natural political inclination, I guess, of a people.
Right, and another thing is how are you ever going to submit to another man? And I don't. That sounds kind of suggestive, but what I mean is you're never going to willingly give power to another person you see as an equal, right? It doesn't work like that. You need to submit power to someone who is above you in an objective sense, right? So they need to have, this divine mandate, right, that makes them sanctioned by God to rule, right? Otherwise, you're just mutually agreeing this man is the best among us, which is often not true at all, right? I mean, whatever you think of Trump, do you think he was the best man among us for the job? Obviously not. So there's nothing divinely implicated in that. Whereas, in a true monarchy, that would be present. Because, like I was saying earlier, it's proven. It is decided based on the actions rather than just purely in name only. So to the point where I could see, on the horizon, like a truly great, general leading a type of secession or civil war or something, and he could be a monarch that clears out the old political system and ushers in a divinely mandated one. But right, once again, that would require total upheaval. Is not possible within this currently empty system. Well, any other thoughts, Cass?
No, that's about it.
All right. Well, I don't know who else wants to talk. In the meantime, I have a few other things that I'll read. I'll read through these last comments, and if nobody else jumps in, then I'm going to call it. So, Funky Clock says, the 1791 Constitution ceded the death of the U.S. when it included the Establishment Clause, aka separation of church and state. Yeah, separation of church and state is gay. We do not like separation of church and state. Well, for the exact reasons, listed above. You're totally divorcing yourself from any type of divine principle. But also, more importantly, how can you have a philosophy that is guided by anything other than religion? Are you supposed to totally divorce your belief of what is right and wrong by your metaphysical, transcendent belief of what is right and wrong? It's just stupid. The point where, as soon as you remove church from state it's automatically oppressive. It's completely arbitrary, and once again, it's a castle of sand. There's nothing backing it up. So, to separate church and state, you're really opening up a can of worms there. All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. This has been a lot of fun. Glad that we got to return to this. I'm going to go off now.